dictating, this is, hey, work with me, Sekhmet. Okay, work with me, Hathor. Work with me. All the, you're basically dictating to the spirits. This is what you want them to do. That's Boo Fam. Peace and blessings. This is Derric More. And been wanting to do a video about this, about how to actually establish a rapport with the spirits, mainly because there's been a lot of people that have been hitting me up about this. And like I said, I wanted to do a video about this, but I've been kind of reluctant, kind of hesitant about doing it, mainly because I didn't want to color someone else's perspective or someone else's experience. In other words, I didn't want me to go ahead and share my experience and then people go ahead and interpret that and say, well, hey, well, Raku did this, so this is the way it's supposed to be done. So I didn't want people to go ahead and interpret it as being the gospel. I wanted people to go ahead and explore working with the spirit themselves and go from there. But after all the different emails and, like I said, different messages that have come across and everything, Spirit was like, yeah, we need to go ahead and make that video about this. So here we are. So before we begin, first of all, what I want to go ahead and say is that the thing about Kemetic spirituality that we have to keep in mind is that the Kemetic people, the Kemetic society, it existed for thousands of years. And within that time frame, there was 4 major schools of thought. Okay. Now I want you to kind of think about that and keep that in perspective. Think about what 4 schools of thought mean. In contemporary times, we would call these denominations. Basically, it's kind of like Christianity. In Christianity, you have your Pentecostal, you have your you have your Roman Catholicism, you have your Eastern Orthodox, you have your Abyssinian, and they all refer to themselves as Christian. But it's different denominations based upon different interpretations of how they read the Bible for whatever reason. Okay. Well, the same thing happened with Kemet. In Kemet, for the most part, they all believed in the same thing. They just had different approaches or different ways of approaching working with the spirit. And that became basically, like I said, their major 4 schools of thought, okay, or denominations. Now, if you keep that in mind and you look at it from that perspective of there being 4 thoughts within thousands of years, the question that should come to mind is, how come we don't know about this? How come that we don't, how come there's not more information that has been made public about this? And the reason why is because archaeologists, historians, and a lot of these enthusiasts, what they are trying to do, or what they have been successful in doing, is basically they want to deify the Kemetic people. They want to deify the Kemetic society or their culture. And the whole purpose of deifying them is that when you do so, you're projecting them as basically being an extraordinary individual. Okay? It's kind of like what they've done to Jesus. If you read about Jesus and you're inspired by Jesus and everything, by them going ahead and saying, well, Jesus is the Son of God, excuse me, by them saying that Jesus is the Son of God, what happens is that when you are a follower of Jesus, you basically look upon this individual as someone you can aspire to be like, but someone you will never be like. Okay. Well, the same thing happens with the Kemetic society, the Kemetic people. We've read about all their accomplishments. We've read about the fact that they've all these different things that they've done. But you ever notice that in most of your history classes or anytime they're talking about this, you ever notice that they never really focus on the fact that this society existed for thousands of years and lived relatively at peace with each other and their neighbors. Okay? So the reason why they never focus on that and the reason why they never really say anything about it is because, like I said, by them going ahead and not talking about this and taking that humanistic, the humanistic aspect out of them and deifying them, it makes them appear to be extraordinary individuals. So the reason why they can accomplish this is because, well, they were quote unquote ancient aliens, or they were descendants from Atlantis, and all these other, wild theories that people come up with. When you go ahead and you project them like that, it's basically being someone that exists outside of the human experience. They basically appear, like I said, they appear as extraordinary individuals or extraterrestrial individuals. And this is the reason why they keep doing this. This is why it's also important whenever you start dealing with Kemetic spirituality, the first thing you need to do is read the history. Let me rephrase that, study the history, okay? And I would even go so far to say you have to study the history from an Afrocentric perspective. And the reason for doing so is not necessarily because you want to go ahead and you want to understand how the Kemetic people were from an African perspective, but the Afrocentric perspective versus the Eurocentric perspective is, you have to remember, the Kemetic people, the society existed within the continent of Africa. This is thousands of years before there was a so-called quote-unquote Middle East. There is no such thing as the Middle East, okay? It is in the continent of Africa, all right? So when you study it from an Afrocentric perspective, you're able to get that reality. You're not looking at it from an outsider in. You're basically going ahead and you're looking at a society of people that existed amongst another society of people within the African continent. Okay? So, first thing we need to do, like I said, understand that there was 4 schools of thought, and understand that the Kemetic people were African people. Okay? They were black and brown skinned African people. All right? When you take that in consideration and you think about that, keep that in mind. When you look at it from that perspective, when it comes to actually going ahead and now approaching Kemetic spirituality, you see there's 2 different approaches. There's, when you approach it from an Afrocentric perspective or more of a holistic perspective versus the Eurocentric perspective. And I know that might sound like I'm being biased, but there's a reason why I'm saying this. When you approach it from an African perspective versus the Eurocentric perspective, you're not looking at it from a Eurocentric perspective. You're not looking at it as a people who existed thousands of years ago and this is their history, okay? When you approach it from an Afrocentric perspective, you're looking at it as, these are our ancestors, or these are our ancient ancestors, okay? When you approach it again from an Afrocentric perspective, and most of the individuals who practice Kemetic spirituality that I know of and that I've come across who practice Kemetic spirituality from an Afrocentric perspective, when we go in here and we look at the Kemetic tradition or Kemetic society and all the different practices as compared to now, it's basically like we're following steps of why certain things are done now based upon something that was done thousands of years ago. Okay, for instance, Why is libations poured? Why does so many African people of African descent, why do they pour libations? Well, where can we trace that back? Well, first people to go in here and pour libations were in Kemet. Okay, so from an Afrocentric perspective, we look at Kemetic spirituality, or we look at the Kemetic society, the Kemetic tradition, and so forth and so on. We look at it as basically this is our reference point. This is our starting point. We do certain things. Well, why do we do this? Oh, it's because of this right here. It's because this is what our ancient ancestors along the Nile River did. Okay? So, again, keep in mind, you have 4 schools of thought. You have the Afrocentric perspective versus the Eurocentric perspective. Okay? And those are things we have to go ahead and we have to keep in mind in order to establish a rapport with the spirits, with the Kemetic spirits. All right? Now, part of the reason for going ahead and bringing up this whole thing about the 4 schools of thought is that the Kemetic people did not leave, or the Kemetic sages did not leave any text or any book that actually explained in detail, step by step, how to practice their spiritual tradition. Now, I remember the first time I said this, a couple of times I've said this, there was people, I'm not going to even say where they was from, that went ahead and they kind of jumped me. Oh, no, you're wrong, this and that and the other, blah, 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 blah. The Kemetic people believe this, this, and this, and this. And, of course, they were already, guns loaded, ready to go ahead and go blazing, okay? They missed what I was saying. What I'm saying is that there's 4 schools of thought. And the Kemetic people did not actually, or no text has been found, no book has been found or recovered or published for that matter, that actually states this is how you practice this part of the tradition or this denomination, okay, or this school of thought. All right. For instance, one of the schools of thought was it was devoted to Djahuti, okay, or who the Greeks called Thoth. Djahuti, from the Kemetic perspective, was the Kemetic Moses, the lawgiver, all right? In fact, they've already traced this back, and they've already found that there's a lot of things that they found Moses did. You can trace it back to Djahuti, okay? So not going to even go there because that's a whole nother video, all right? But the point that I'm making is that if Djahuti is basically the Kemetic Moses, and you have this following of individuals who basically, or this following that people go ahead and, again, Westerners, they want to go ahead and call it a cult. But if you have these followers of Djahuti, and they see Djahuti as basically being a, like I said, a mosaic figure, all right? Where is the text, or where is a book that basically says this is how you become a follower of Djahuti? Okay? There is none. And this is what I'm talking about. There is no book, or there is no text that actually states step by step, this is how you become a follower of Djahuti. Okay, this is how you become, this is how you do things as a follower of Djahuti. There is none. Okay, so because there is no step-by-step manual that actually says this is how you practice Kemetic spirituality, this is how you practice this, or this is how you do X, Y, Z. Because there is no step-by-step manual on this, what has happened is that anybody with the inspiration has come in and speculated on this is how Kemetic spirituality is supposed to be practiced. This is how people go ahead, or they can say this is how the people practice Kemetic spirituality. This is how the Kemetic people did this. This is how the Kemetic people did that. Okay? And that's because there is no main step-by-step like I said, manual or text that actually says this is how you're supposed to practice things. Okay? So, this is the reason why it's important for us to go ahead and keep in mind. There's 4 schools of thought. You have a Eurocentric perspective, and you also have an Afrocentric perspective, and why it's important to actually study it, the Kemetic history from an Afrocentric perspective. Okay? And that there's no actual manual that gives the detailed instructions of how to practice it. With all that being said, here comes our approach of how to work with the spirits. If you approach Kemetic spirituality from a Eurocentric perspective, then basically you're looking at it from an outside in. In other words, it's kind of like me going ahead and saying, well, I want to learn about the Japanese culture, or I want to consider myself a astute individual of Japanese culture. So I read all the books and everything that has been written about Japanese culture. I will go and I will read about the religion, read about all those things, read about everything from, about Japan and Okinawa, the whole deal, read about all of this, okay? And then write a book about Shintoism. Would it be an accurate depiction if I was to do this? Not really, okay? There are so many missing variables that exist that would prevent me from actually going ahead and giving a holistic perspective on the Japanese culture. Well, for the most part, this is the same thing that has happened with the Kemetic society, okay, with understanding Kemetic spirituality. For the most part, most people who've gone ahead and they've talked about Kemetic spirituality and so forth, that's all they've done. They've read books about it. They've read books about the different divinities, the different spirits, this and that and the other, which is basically just the archaeologists and historians' understanding of it just stated over again, okay? But they've read things about this, and this is where they go, all right? That doesn't give a holistic perspective. That gives basically a working definition of how to go ahead and deal with Kemetic spirituality, which is where most people start. And the reason why, and I always say this, the reason why I know about this is because this is how I approached it, all right? So if you approach Kemetic spirituality from this Eurocentric or this Western perspective, this is how you see the Kemetic the Kemetic spiritual tradition. This is how you see the Kemetic spirits. You basically look at them as being almost like a car. You know how you see a car, a brand new car, not necessarily a brand new car, but you know how you see a car and you want to try it out. You think, I need a car. So you go in there and you go to the dealership or whatever, look at the car, check out the, suspension and all that kind of stuff, check out the sounds and everything, take it for a test drive. This is how most people are approaching Kemetic spirituality, okay? And whenever I get these, and again, I'm not trying to fault anybody, not trying to go ahead and, put anybody on blast by saying this. But whenever I get these questions, how do I work with, Sekhmet? How do I work with Hathor? And how do I work with all these, with these different divinities and stuff? Whenever I get those kind of questions, this is what comes to mind. It's like you're approaching this as if this is a brand new car, okay? You're basically going ahead and you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, well, for instance, I like Isis. Isis, I like the fact that I like that headdress that she has on. I like that she's always nursing, Hethru, or she is always nursing Horus. I'm attracted to Isis. Let me go ahead and start worshiping her, or let me start going ahead and working with her. And like I said, when you approach it from that perspective, it's very Eurocentric, it's very Western, and it's very, It's not organic. Okay. It's very egotistic, because basically what you're doing is going ahead and you're approaching the spirit with your glass half full with some malt liquor, asking the spirit, hey, pour me some wine, and then wondering how come the spirit is not responding to you, because the spirit is like, we're not trying to make no ripple. Y'all know what ripple is. But but they're like, we're not trying to make none of this. Okay? That's the reason why you're not making any progress, because you're coming, you basically have in mind what you think the spirit is going to tell you. Okay? You have in mind what you think Sekhmet is going to tell you. All right? And you're, for the most part, dictating, hey, work with me, Sekhmet. Okay? Work with me, Hathor. Work with me on you're basically dictating to the spirits, this is what you want them to do. Okay? This is a Western approach. This is, like I said, it's a Eurocentric approach. And this is the reason why I'm going through all that. I went through all those different, excuse me, I went through all those different, explanations of how this happens. Okay? The more organic approach, the more holistic approach of working with the spirits is basically something's going on in your life. And the way you approach it is you open yourself up, humble yourself, and say, hey, I need some help with this situation. I need some help in dealing with this. I need some help in working with my, in working with my spouse. I need some help in working with my kids. I need some help on the job. I need some assistance on how to improve my finances, on how to make ends meet, on how to pay these bills. I need some assistance. Open yourself up by humbling yourself. And when you do that, that's when the Kemetic spirits come about. They'll leave little fingerprints. You'll all of a sudden see these little signs letting them know they're trying to contact you. And the reason why is because you've humbled yourself, you've suspended your ego, and you basically humbled yourself, and this is how the Kemetic spirits come about. This is what they're here for. This is what they want. They don't want you telling them basic, this is what you read and this is how you're supposed to approach them. No, it's the other way around. They want you to go ahead and learn from them. Okay? And like I said, when you approach it from that perspective, from this organic perspective, which is the Afrocentric perspective, okay, because this is how it's done in every traditional, in most of your traditional African societies. This is how they work the spirits. If you approach it from that perspective, you'll all of a sudden notice these different signs, these different fingerprints, these different, spiritual fingerprints. For instance, all of a sudden you'll wake up in the morning and it's 3:33. You almost run into a car and the back of the license plate says something like 11. You'll talk to a stranger and the stranger all of a sudden starts talking about something regarding the spirit, regarding an Egyptian spirit or so, just off the blue. These are all ways in which the spirit goes ahead and the spirits go ahead and they talk to you. And they let you know, hey, we're listening. But this is how they want you to approach them. They don't want you approaching them. And I'm not saying that you can't do that, so don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is, from my experience, the way in which I've worked with them, the way in which I've come in contact with them and had these these awe-inspiring, light bulb, aha, oh my God, aha moments, is when I approached them from that humbling perspective by realizing everything I've read and everything I've learned, those are just signposts, okay? That's all it is. It's a signpost to tell me how to get to the avenue, All right. But but they want you to open yourselves up to them so that they can go ahead and they can teach you the new things, so that we can go ahead and move on to a new plane of existence, or we can go ahead and improve this state that we're in. All right. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Hopefully that kind of resonates with you, and it answers your question in regards to how to work with them. Like I said, stop trying to work with them. Humble yourselves out to them so that they can go ahead and they can work with you. Stop trying to work with them. Take the books and all that kind of stuff, put them to the side. All right. Get rid of like I said, temporarily suspend your intellect, because this is what is preventing a lot of us from actually growing spiritually and being empowered by our spirits. All right. So, got any comments, questions, or suggestions? Feel free to drop me a line. Until next time, Hethru. Peace.